Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to a television review this time. I'm Chris, joined today with George to give our review on Netflix's step back into the world of Thra, which is The Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, the 10-part series commissioned by Jim Henson Company and returned to the world of The Dark Crystal. The original movie came out in 1982, so it has been a very long time. And any talks of getting any kind of sequel or return to this world have all been just null and void. Just met with countless dead ends, production problems here and there, to the point where we never thought we'd get to go back to this world again. But, Netflix has been putting out some great content and really stepping outside the box with the stuff that they make. And here we are with 10 more hours of Dark Crystal. Now, recently, you actually watched Dark Crystal, the movie, for the first time, which we will do a review on at some point after this. We did discuss about doing a review for the movie before this TV series, but as this series serves as a prequel, I think it's still going to be effective to do the movie review after it. But what were your thoughts on the original movie, having watched it like a couple of weeks ago?
It wasn't what I expected. When it's done by like Jim Henson, Muppets, Frank Oz, and not that it's a kids show, but it's very much that 80s young audience. I did not expect to come out half traumatized from the puppets. Whether they're like stripping someone naked and doing a Cersei Lannister to them, or whether they're eating dinner at a table, it was quite not terrifying, but I definitely would not have liked that at the age of 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm.
Any kid that saw that, I've got mad respect to you. They probably did come out traumatized. But no, yeah. It was a weird one because I didn't know literally anything about it except people I know had seen it. And I really like sort of the puppetry and whatnot. It's not really a genre I've seen a lot of films from. And obviously, not to sound like rude, it's early 80s, some things have aged as well as others. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. Once I kind of got into it, it definitely helped. And then you forget how short it is, obviously being a product of its time or not. So the film was actually all right. I enjoyed that, but I was looking forward to this purely based off the voice cast, which was I wanted to get this done to try and then get into the series. Now I've only watched the first episode from the TV series, which definitely doesn't help. But it's a good benchmark. I think I would have struggled more if I'd watched the series first and then the film. I think doing the film first, then that would kind of help it a little bit more.
Yeah, no, definitely. For me, the original film, I can't even remember when I watched the original film first. I think I watched Labyrinth, which is, again, like a similar Jim Henson kind of movie, and The Muppets. That's what I tended to watch the most when I was a kid. Dark Crystal, I think I came into very late, and similar to Blade Runner, it was one of those movies where I first watched it and I wasn't really into it. I didn't get it. I didn't get invested into it as much as everyone else was. I think it was definitely sort of like cult classic and had its own unique audience. But the more I watched it, and again, like Blade Runner, I gravitated to a lot more, and I really appreciated the complexity of it and how, it was really, really trying to push these complex thematic ideas with it, especially with the limitations at the time. And it's a film that I absolutely love now. Being a fan of fantasy in general, I definitely think it's one of the best out there. But you could tell that, Jim Henson and Frank Oz directed that original movie. They had all of these ideas, this massive, wide mythology and legendarium that they wanted to make. And they had to get it down to like a 2-hour movie, if that. And I don't think that was the length required for something like that. Thankfully, now we have Netflix with a whole 10 hours, which might be a little bit too long, which I'll get into in my review in a second. But before we get into our review, be sure to follow us on our social media. We'll have links appearing at the bottom now. We've got Facebook, that's slash Cinema Savvy. We've got Twitter at cinema_savvy, and the same again for Instagram as well. Go and check us out on there because we are upping more of the reviews now and everything like that. So this Dark Crystal TV series, when the trailer started coming out and there were countless featurettes for this thing, I already knew this was in good hands. The director had directed stuff like Clash of the Titans with Sam Worthington in 2010, which was not one of my favorite movies of all time. And he's had sort of a lot of shaky movies. So I was kind of worried about the director, but I think what was carrying this this series for me was the production team behind it. They had all of the Jim Henson Company back again. They had people who worked on the original movie, the conceptual design for the original film, and you could really tell that they had a passion for this. The fact as well that they were using puppetry again. This could very easily have been done in CGI by today's standards, and you could tell that they had a lot of passion for it and wanted to make it visually as close to that original movie obviously they're still using more digital work in this one as well because it's 2019 and they can do more things with it. But I think that they absolutely nailed the balance with this thing. And the biggest takeaway I had from this whole series, if I talk about it in general as a whole at first, was that you're watching this thing and it's one of the most imaginative things I've seen in years. It's a complete nostalgia throwback, but it's in a world of digital and, CGI, and they can do incredible things with that. It was such a breath of fresh air to see real puppets and animatronics and costumes and creatures that had been meticulously created and hand painted and things like that. It really does give that tangible quality to it. And you're watching it, like all 10 hours of it, and it gets to the point where you're no longer watching puppets, you're watching actual characters. And I don't think enough credit's given to the puppeteers and everything like that. Yes, you get your voice casting afterwards that supply the voice and the actual emotion of the character, but a lot of it is initially done from those puppeteers that actually film it on set before it even gets to ADR and voiceover work.
Yeah, I think the puppets is a big thing for me because if you think about not modern issues, but it would have been so easy to go down the CGI route, which a lot of things would have done. I think a very fair comparison. I know that Frank Oz is involved with all of these. If you think back to the Empire Strikes Back, you got Yoda, then you got CGI prequels, then you get Last Jedi, where it's back to puppetry. I really liked that sort of Dark Crystal not followed in that suit because it was so integral to its do puppets. But the fact that in modern technology, yes, it's easy to do CGI, but with modern technology, you can also make puppets as incredible with a not higher resolution, but you can have that setup in the modern day sort of equipment, the modern day sort of what's the word, like cameras and stuff. I don't know if I'm phrasing it correctly, but it was the fact they kept it integral to that made a massive impact. Although I was brand new to it, I saw the episode like a day after I saw the film. Mm-hmm. It felt very connected that you could, it flowed. Obviously, naturally, there's some sort of aging stuff with the camera lenses, but there wasn't this visual jump to, whoa, this is a completely different prequel. It felt like you're back in that world. And now, speaking of the world itself, you need a notepad, as you said to me for episode 1. It goes sort of Lord of the Rings opening 10 minutes on you.
Yeah.
And that was a real big thing to take into account because it's a puppet TV series, not to undermine it, but it was getting that Lord of the Rings, you know what you're in for. Mm-hmm. And this was kind of like, but it's a kid's show. not to sound like rude, but and it was kind of like, whoa, like, I need to take a lot of things into account. I didn't know any character names, still by the end of episode 1. I think it's one of them shows that you'll gradually learn them all one by one, but I think it's a really big thing because I think, ultimately this could, if say hypothetically it's the best script in history for 10 TV episodes, but you had a completely CGI series, it's failed.
Yeah. I think the strengths of this is that it knows what its audience is. Like law of averages, you go to anyone on the street and you mention Dark Crystal, they're probably not going to know what you're talking about. The film, I don't know if it was a financial failure. I don't think it did particularly well. Just having a look here. It may double its budget, which I guess is fair. But after that, not really many people talked about it. So I think it was very smart in that, yes, it is also framing it for a new audience that can watch this. Kids can watch this. It still does have that danger and those scary moments in it and those very mature moments as well, like the original film, which, could scare some kids. But that's what 80s movies at the time and kids movies at the time were like. And I'm glad that they managed to bring that level of intensity to it. But I think the audience for this is going to be people who remember the original film. Although I know yourself, you were introduced to this brand new, like a lot of people were, I'm sure, with this new TV series. But I'm glad that, when you're going back and doing prequels, and we're seeing this loads now where these old properties from the 80s or whatever it happens to be, we're either getting sequels 30 odd years later, or we're getting these, we're dipping back into these worlds like Blade Runner, for example. That was another one. There's countless other ones that have come out over the last few years. You've got to stay true to what the heart of the original was. And I'm very glad that this one did. Similar to the original movie as well, I think that the conceptual design and the artistry and the costumes and everything like that is definitely the original film's strength, possibly over its story and its characters. With the original movie, I guess I'm going into my review of the original movie now, but I do think the main characters in general are very lacking a kind of one note and not very interesting. It's the world and the mythology that I get invested with when I watch that movie. And you have a lot more characters in this one, and kind of what you said, you've only watched one episode. I've watched all 10, but I guess I do need to state this, that, you know, I don't know every character's name. I don't know every place name. There is a lot of name and information that is given to you in this thing. So I'm not going to know everything off the back of my hand after one viewing. The characters are a lot more interesting in this one compared to the original film, namely down to the fact that you've got 10 hours to play within this thing as opposed to 2 hours. And it gives it more room to breathe and everything like that. You kind of have three main characters in this thing, if I share the screen very, very quickly. So you've got the characters of Rian, you've got Deet, and you've got Breya, and these are from three clans of the race of what they're called Gelfling. These are the characters that you follow throughout the main series, and I think the story does a very good job of splitting between them and showing the different societies and different backgrounds that they come from. You have Rian, who's this very, you know, army-driven commander, captain of the guard kind of clan. You have Deet, who's this earth-dwelling Gelfling, and they're very spiritual and, you know, worship the trees and everything like that. And then you've got Breya, who comes from this almost like a citadel kind of place full of knowledge and high society kind of thing. It's an interesting dynamic, and then as the story goes on, the three of their stories converge and they unite, which gives birth to this resistance that they're putting together to overthrow the Skeksis, who are the villains of this thing. The Skeksis were always the most interesting thing to me with Dark Crystal. I'm going to show them now because the designs for these things are great. You mentioned that you were terrified by these things when you first saw the movie.
Yeah, the design of them, it's not what you expect. When someone says, oh, this is something done by the guy that did the Muppets, you expect the Gelflings, you don't expect this. This is just incredible. They're so sort of disgusting, and each one is so different from the other. You can tell they're a species, but you can also tell each one apart, whereas obviously some sort of, not like armies, but obviously some of the puppets are very similar, whereas these were their own thing. You obviously have, like, you had the Emperor as well. You had that one I don't know the name of, who just says all the time.
Or the Lord Chamberlain.
That's the one.
He was played by Simon Pegg in this series.
See, that's the thing. The voice cast, that it seems to me, it's got that kind of, not, I would say, cult status. I don't know a lot about it, but you can imagine that when the agents came out saying there's going to be a Dark Crystal TV series, you could only imagine the amount of actors and whatnot being like, get us a role. Doesn't matter what the role is, we want to be on this to some capacity. You know, when you've got like Mark Hamill coming into it as well, obviously friends with Frank Oz, and has obviously massive respect for the industry. But the cast is one of the best voice casts I think I've seen in quite a while. I know I tend to say that quite often when you look at voice casts, but when you've got something I think this niche that's probably this beloved, and I can imagine a lot of those actors would have only agreed to it when they sort of like, if this was like an all CGI production, again, not to keep jumping back to that, but Matt Cameron would be like, no chance, I'm not doing it. You can imagine that they've all got so much respect for the film. They might have had kids that grew up with it. They might have had themselves grew up with it. But you can imagine it being quite personal with a lot of this, because with the Skeksis, it's, you know, do you really think Simon Pegg, like they needed Simon Pegg to play the thing, Chamberlain, sorry. You know, anyone in the world could have done that, but you could imagine someone like Simon Pegg being like, I'd happily do it.
He's totally down for it, yeah. Because he does like that old culture, doesn't he? Like, you know, Star Trek, Star Wars, everything like that. So I'm assuming Dark Crystal was, you know, part of his upbringing. You know, he's watched it. I thought the cast was absolutely incredible in this thing, and I guarantee that's what it was. You know, they just need to pitch that they're doing this thing, and everyone wants to be a part of it if they can in some way, shape, or form. I've mentioned the positives, which again is sort of the conceptual design and the imagination and the puppets. And I'm watching things in this thinking, I'm trying to think of the behind the scenes for this thing. I'm hoping when this thing comes out on Blu-ray and DVD, we get a kind of Lord of the Rings appendices type thing where you can see all of this in action. I know you can see little bits in the featurettes, but the sets they create, the things they've built for this thing look absolutely incredible. If I'm going to go into some negatives, because I do have some negatives, I've mentioned it at the beginning, which kind of makes me sound very contradictory in that a 2-hour movie was too short for this thing. On the flip side, I think that 10 hours is too long for the story that they're telling for this thing. The story, for anyone who doesn't know, on the planet Thra, 3 Gelflings, Rian, Breya, and Deet, inspire a rebellion against the exploitative Skeksis when they discover a horrifying secret behind their power that threatens all of Thra. It's a very simple story. You kind of do have your very clear-cut good guys, bad guys. There's sort of not very many morally grey people in the middle. And the Skeksis are just kind of one note from episode 1 all the way through, and the Gelflings are good all the way through. And I do think for a story like that, you don't need 10 hours. Yes, it's great, but this is the conflict I have, because on the one hand, having 10 hours of this content and getting all of this imagination and all of these puppets and everything like that is great. And I'm like, give me more, I want more episodes. I want to see more of this world and get invested in it. But also from a story standpoint, it does meander quite a lot in the middle. I think it does lose its focus a little bit. And I think by the end, the status quo hasn't changed all of that much from the original. So it feels like it's a tad too long. That's one of my criticisms. And I'm going to try and avoid spoilers as much as I can, because I know that you're only one episode into this thing. I don't know if you've got the intention of dipping back into it and going through the rest of it.
Try. I've been scouring the films, and this will be when I get back into tell you. This is going to be the first one I finish off.
There are some plot points which feel very rushed or kind of abandoned entirely. I don't want to go too much into it, but at the end of episode 1, it's what was mentioned in the synopsis there, where the Skeksis do something shocking. It's draining essence of someone. It's exactly like the original movie. And again, if you've seen the original movie, you kind of know where this show's teeing up for. And we get the impression that Rian and this character who gets drained are very close, sort of like boyfriend-girlfriend kind of thing. There's a relationship there. This is kind of neglected halfway through, where he doesn't mention it, and then he kind of starts macking on Deet a little bit. And there's no mention of what happened to Mira, this woman who he loved, who got, murdered by the Skeksis or anything like that. And I did feel that was kind of weird for the character. What else? I did want to mention as well that I thought this was going to be a one and done series. I thought this was going to be our lead into the original movie. It was going to end kind of like Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, where everything's tied in a neat little bow, packaged off, and you can go straight into A New Hope and everything's explained. That's mostly the case with some things. We get introduced to things like, I don't know, you would get introduced to some characters and to some soldiers that would appear in the final movie, which I was waiting to see from episode 1. It was really great to see those. But also that it doesn't end on the same status quo where the movie begins. When the movie begins, we're pretty much told that the 2 Gelflings that we see in that movie are the last 2 Gelflings on the entire planet of Thra. All the rest have been, wiped out, kind of like the Jedi again, all been wiped out until we get to like the last few. And not to give too much away, but we don't end on that same status quo. It ends very, very differently. And there are some loose plot ends which do end on a cliffhanger for some particular characters, where I'm assuming they can go into a season 2 if they want to. I just don't know if you need a season 2, and I think they could have. There is a moment where they could have framed this ending at the same place where the movie begins. I guess they're counting on that this thing's got legs, that this thing's very popular. I think it's got 90% on Rotten Tomatoes at the moment, and it's got an audience. I don't know how well it's done in terms of general people watching it, but it does end where it looks like they're going to go straight into another one at some point.
Is it like a Rise of the Planet of the Apes, where people thought, right, we've got a film, this is going to show everything happened, and it's there like, you've given us a good chunk of it, but we need that extra amount to see. Well, even Dawn, I guess you could say, is kind of more officially tied up when you get to War. Is it that kind of vibe where you can still see a prequel, but you can still see if they wanted to add more to it, they easily could?
Yeah, it would be the equivalent of take X-Men First Class, but don't have Xavier get crippled at the end of it. And and then you're like, okay, well, we know that this happens, but we're not there yet. There's room for more that they need to tell.
So him getting bold, and then we get Apocalypse next.
Yes, exactly. But I have seen interviews with the creator and the director and everything like that. And I think the character of Augur in the movie, she mentions that, people have said about the ending, it contradicts the beginning of the movie. And is there going to be something in between? Are we going to get to that point? And the director said, well, how do we know that this is telling the same story? And there are theories out there how the world kind of repeats. It's doomed to repeat itself, where, the world will be created. You'll have the Skeksis and this, and ultimately it will culminate in the same end goal where the Skeksis will become evil. It will be joined, and then everything will reset like a record on repeat almost, and then it will be a new world and everything like that, and they'll try and change events and make them good this time, but they're probably going to go bad, and it's just going to keep repeating itself. And they did mention that, saying that how do we know that the story that this prequel series is telling isn't, you know, it might not tie into the original movie. This might tell its own thing, and then the movie is just a different interpretation of what events will take place. And I don't know how I feel about that, because I think there are a lot of nods in this thing to the original film, and it does feel very much like it's trying to eventually get to a point where it's set up for that. We have Auburn in the comments as well, who says, just started watching this last night, not sure how I feel about it yet. To the credit of the original movie, I will say that the movie feels a little bit more mature in its themes. It feels a bit more grandiose, a bit more operatic, and more beautiful to watch in terms of its poetry and what it's trying to say visually than this. This is very much sort of an action thing, and it's making use of the fact that it does have more capabilities this time around. It's telling a bigger story, but I don't know if all the themes and the heart is there as much as, you know, the original film was. I don't know. I feel like this is a series that I'm going to have to rewatch and see how it stacks up on second viewing. But I don't think it's a complete walk away masterpiece, certainly in terms of puppetry and what they've actually managed to get on screen, and even returning to this world and fleshing the culture out and the lore more. Absolutely hats off to them for that thing. But the story, I do think, is a bit overblown. They could have truncated it down a little bit more, and I think they could have got it to a point where they could have just knocked this out in one prequel series. I don't think you need a season 2 of Dark Crystal, a season 3, or however many they're planning to do. In terms of the world and how rich it is, you could absolutely do that, but I'm thinking in terms of brevity of the story. I don't know if it's that complex that necessitates, you know, having a bunch of series for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard with me because I'm one episode in, so I'm intrigued to see where it goes. But obviously, with what you said, not really like a spoiler thing, but obviously knowing you're not going to get the ending of where you think Dark Crystal would start, that's going to be interesting. Now I have that knowledge to see how it stacks up, and it would be the same, I guess, with a rewatch. That when you think of a prequel series, you think it's gonna, like, especially with it being 10 episodes as well, not like it was like 2 episodes, like, or like a prequel film. It was literally, here's the 10 episodes. So I'm intrigued to see what happens, because I think it did get a good reception from the majority of the people, but I have some people that have been issues with it. So it'd be interesting to see what does come next. And like I said, I'm intrigued. I will get around to finishing this off. But it's a case one of those series where it's got a very specific niche, and I know a couple of people at work have started watching it. They're like, we can't. Apparently, it appears on Netflix to the kids area because they've all got kids. They're like, yeah, our kids saw it, and we said no straight away. Like, I can't imagine 4 or 5-year-olds not struggling to watch it, but I think it'd be tough for them to watch as well.
Yeah, but I'm glad that it didn't shy away from the scary stuff. I'm glad they didn't like spoon feed anything. Like, I was watching movies like this all the time. Never Ending Story, Return to Oz, some of the, you know, Snow White, the original Disney film, absolutely traumatic stuff to watch as a kid, but I liked films that had that danger to it and weren't afraid to go those places. The last thing I wanted to mention was the soundtrack. The soundtrack to this series is done by Daniel Pemberton and Samuel Slim. Trevor Jones did the original soundtrack to the 1982 film. They used the original theme twice, I believe, in this prequel series. They use it as the opening title comes up in episode 1, and they play it just before the closing credits of the final episode. I like that they use it. I would have liked to have heard the main theme a little bit more, but it does kind of have its own musical themes, which, you know, it's fine if it's setting up this completely different age, this different time for these characters. I'm just glad that they did use some of those original themes for the characters. For the most part, the voice acting work on the Skeksis, you know, it does sound very similar. Simon Pegg does an amazing job as the Lord Chamberlain and gets his mannerisms completely down. It was amazing to hear Mark Hamill, who, weirdly enough, I didn't actually know was Mark Hamill until you told me. As soon as I went back to it, I was like, how the hell did I miss that? Because he does sound exactly like the Joker sometimes in it. It's great. In terms of, you know, how it's made and everything like that, absolute hats off to them. Netflix really do surprise you with the stuff that they bring out and the stuff that they want to make. I'd like to see them do more stuff like this. I am game for a series 2 if they are going to take the story and, you know, gear it more towards that original film. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know how long it takes to make one of these things. I think this has been in production for probably about 2 years now. I think they said that, you know, they were initially getting the ball rolling with this thing. So I don't know. I guess I don't really have much else to say. I feel like I'm repeating myself now, but I guess, you know, people in the comments, let me know what you think of this series. Do you think it stacks up against the original film and everything like that? Or do you think that it is a little bit lackluster? Or do you think it is a masterpiece of modern puppetry and everything like that? because I was thinking about it and I was trying to think of the last time that I saw a thing completely made with puppets. And I know that you mentioned like Last Jedi has puppets and animatronics and things like that. It might be Team America World Police.
A complete puppet.
Because it feels a little bit like a dying art form almost.
Yeah,
you know,
even
motion animation's kind of clinging on there. 2D animation to me is the one that's almost dead at the moment, unfortunately.
Even like the reboot of Thunderbirds was a 3D
CGI,
cartoon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't actually know. That's a good thing. You know what? Team America is probably one of the fairest shouts. There's probably some stuff on kids' TV, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if kids like puppets, but
because
the
I could
Muppets
imagine
film from a couple of years ago. No, because that's actors as well, isn't it?
Yeah. I could imagine this might be kind of weird though. Like I know you mentioned like the actual content of the show being very dark and mature at some points, but in terms of just seeing these puppets, they might be kind of alien to some kids now, like a new generation. Like I remember them, of course, because all the movies that I used to watch as a kid had puppets in, so it was just second nature. But now we've had an entire generation grew up on computer animated characters. So how's this going to go over to them? Because I remember my parents, for example, used to watch was it like Dick Tracy, Thunderbirds, and everything like that? That was their generation of TV. But when I watch those old puppet things, they are incredibly dated to me, and they give me that kind of creepy vibe to them. I never grew up liking Thunderbirds. I always thought they were very scary and unnerving and things like that. But I don't know. I don't know how this is going to go over. This is why I think that the audience that this is geared for is for the people that remember it, or maybe introducing it to their kids or something like that. I'm not sure. But I pretty much said everything I can on the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. It'd still be good to do a review on the original movie. I think it's been a while since I've watched it. I did want to watch it before I started watching this TV series, but I didn't get around to it. We have a lot of stuff to watch, but I'd like to go back to it and we can get a review out of that at some point. I'm just reading what we've got in the comments. JX Editors just mentioned the new Cats film, saying they weren't puppets. Maybe so.
They're their own creation.
Yes. I don't have anything else to say on this series. Do you have anything else you want to close out with? Or?
That's everything right for me. It's a hard one seeing one episode, but it's an interesting delve into sort of mythology, and I guess even you don't really even point aside, you don't even really see fantasy that much these days, like outright out there proper fantasy. You know, you get your glimpses of it with some things like Fantastic Beasts, where it's like it's kind of fantasy, but it's definitely not. But the outright fantasy films, you struggle to get them anymore, and this is also one, a proper one.
Especially grandiose ones. I know that Natalie Dormer, who's in the cast, in an interview, she mentioned that it's comparable to the likes of Pandora from Avatar or the world of Westeros from Game of Thrones in terms of building modern fantasy. And I like that, and it is really interesting, and it is some lore that I'd like to read up on. It's almost not to the level, but almost comparable to Tolkien. The final thing Auburn says, it makes me wonder if this is done right, if they will see a resurgence in puppet films. Yeah, I'd like to hope for that. I think we will. And I definitely think in the last couple of years, although it's still been very CGI heavy, with the likes of new Star Wars trying to keep itself visually close to the original trilogy, bringing puppets back and people in costumes, more so than the prequels, at least. I think that we are getting to that stage now where hopefully we will see a resurgence in more practical effects. We're seeing that in stunt films as well, action films, the likes of Mission Impossible and, you know, John Wick and things like that. So I'm sure before long we'll get back to a more realer time of cinema, because boy do I need it after 2019. This was a real breath of fresh air to watch this thing. So that'll do it for our review on the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of this series, let us know what you think of the original movie, and would you like to see a resurgence in more practical effects laden movies? Anything you like regarding the Dark Crystal, please do let us know. There's a lot of movies coming out this week. We've got the new Rambo film towards the end of the week. I'm going to do my very best to get watched all of the previous 4 Rambo movies and hopefully get a review out to you guys at some point at the end of the week. And I know I promised this last week. A lot of stuff's happened, but trailer reactions will be returning this week because there's some that I want to go back to, namely the new Terminator trailer that we've had. So thank you to everyone that's tuned in and watched this thing. And until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.